We've spoken today regarding the Evangelical Council of Consecrated Virginity, of Chastity. Let us contemplate one more of the traditional evangelical councils, which is the Evangelical Council of Poverty. And I think it's of extreme importance that we pay attention to this. Many times when I speak of poverty, the reaction is it's practically like a curse, and it's not viewed as a blessing. Many times we're still living in the mind of the Old Testament, where God's blessings were identified. Think of Job, for example, with the abundance of riches. This has translated into modern times into very, very Protestant theology, and it's very difficult that even in our own cultures the same values or anti-values, I dare say, of Protestantism or the Old Testament by comparison to the teachings of Jesus. What was a curse in the Old Testament becomes a beatitude. Just as virginity was a curse, to not conceive, to be sterile was a curse, so poverty was a curse. Jesus has turned it into not only a beatitude, the first beatitude. It's the condition of possibility to enter the kingdom of heaven. Whilst he will later say, or according to the Gospel of St. Luke, that woe to you, the rich. Now we hear these words, and what do we think of them? What do they mean in our lives? Why did Christ deliberately use poverty as the messianic sign to the mystery of the Incarnation? As inseparable as chastity, poverty, and obedience are, we cannot be great at one and a disaster at the other. This has amazing implications, by the way. Imagine if you could measure how a priest or a religious is living chastity by how well he or she lives the Evangelical Council of Poverty. What would my poverty or lack of say of my chastity or of my obedience? You can't be very obedient and unchaste or not live poverty seriously as a condition of possibility to enter into the kingdom. It's a deliberate choice that the Father has made for his own sign, for his own Son. The sign given to the shepherds, you will find a child laid in a manger, wrapped in swaddling cloths. Remember? It's the messianic sign. How will the shepherds recognize the Messiah? And the only sign they are given is a sign of poverty. He's born in a place for animals. The parents don't even have a proper place to bring the Son of God into this world. This was just by chance. This was a mistake. These were the circumstances of the census of the emperor of the time, Caesar Augustus. But the revelation, the fullness of revelation of poverty is always in the person of Jesus Christ, who being rich became poor so as to enrich us with his own poverty. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9. He chose, these are not my words, this is the word of God. Christ chose to become poor, being rich, so as to enrich us with his own poverty. How has Christ enriched my life with his poverty? Normally, we enrich people's lives with riches. When we contemplate this, not only at his birth, but remember, the examples are endless. He's presented to the temple, the presentation. The parents offer the offering of the poor. It's hammered in the gospel constantly, relentlessly, how Jesus Christ deliberately chooses poverty as the messianic sign of his identity and of his mission, who he is and why he was sent into the world. But not only does he choose poverty, he chooses the poor. It's a deliberate choice, the person of Jesus Christ. He chooses to live without a place where to lay his head. And Jesus Christ prefers not only poverty and the poor. We are reminded by Jesus Christ that it is for them that he has come to bring the gospel. It is the messianic sign when the disciples of John come to Jesus and say, "Are you the Messiah, or should we be waiting for someone else?" He doesn't say, "Look at my t-shirt. It says the Word made flesh." He doesn't say, "Read the catechism." No. He gives what is called in theology signs of credibility. What do you do? Many times people will say, "so that we might believe in you." Signs of credibility. And what are the signs of credibility? The lame walk, the blind see, the lepers are cleansed, the dead are raised back to life, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. In other words, until the gospel is preached to the poor, no one will believe that he is the Messiah. So specifically, Jesus Christ has come to evangelize the poor. I didn't write the Gospels. You want to spend hours arguing who are the poor? It's up to you. We understand each other perfectly in English until the word poor or poverty arises. And then we all have to have recourse to the Webster Dictionary, because we can't agree on what the poor is in the Gospels. Well, the poor are the poor. That's it. It's English. As simple as that. I don't think we need to be told who is a poor person and who's not a poor person. Everybody knows. You ask the people, would you say father is poor? Would you say these sisters are poor? Would you say this neighborhood is poor? Everybody knows. Why do we have to spend hours and hours and hours dissecting the word poor and poverty? Sometimes it's just simply a defense mechanism. The fact is that Christ chooses those 12 men who are going to become the foundations of the church, the 12 from among the poor. These are not the elite. These are not the educated. In fact, chapter 7 of St. John, they will say, has any learned member of the Sanhedrin, any of the elders, believed in this man? It's only these people with no education who follow him. Paraphrasing the text. St. Ignatius of Loyola has one of the most brilliant expressions on this. So precious, Ignatius says, so precious are the poor in the eyes of God that from among them he chose the entire apostolic college. And so great are the poor in the eyes of God that when those 12 apostles sit on those thrones, remember, to judge the nations, the 24 elders, the poor will be the counselors of the apostles. Well, how do you like that? That when I come before the throne of God to be judged, and I stand before the apostles, some very poor person is going to whisper, "Let him come in, that he was good to me." Amazing. And this is not Gustavo Gutierrez. This is Ignatius of Loyola. There is a deliberate choice on the part. Be very careful with dismissing the theology on poverty as an ideology, as a part of a certain tendency or theological way of thinking. Let's not make no mistakes. And if I may be very blunt, Give me the name of a millionaire who's been canonized by the Catholic Church. In 2,000 years, you cannot give me the name of a rich person who's been canonized by the Church.
Saint Ferdinand and Saint Isabella.
Yeah, sure. They would, believe me. First of all, they're not canonized to begin with. And there would be a lot to say of how they lived. Just because they were kings doesn't mean they lived in opulence and wealth. But think about it. Think of the history of holiness in the Catholic Church. Don't break your brain thinking of how can we find... Think of it. Think of the things that Jesus says of riches. There is one parable only that is repeated 4 times in the Gospels. Which is it? One parable, 4 times. Twice in St. Luke and 1 in Mark and Matthew. The parable of the sower and the seed. 4 times. When the same parable is repeated 4 times in the Gospel, it must be pretty important. And what does it say about riches that choke the Word of God? But the attraction of riches seduce the heart. The evil, my brothers, is not in the material possessions. The evil is in the heart. The seduction of riches. All creation is good. It was made by the hand of God. In themselves. That's not where the problem is. The problem is the seduction of riches. That how difficult it is, these are not my words, for a rich man to enter the kingdom. Doesn't say impossible, it's interesting. It says how difficult. And as much as technology we may possess, we have still not figured out how to make a camel pass through the eye of a needle. But it doesn't seem to worry us. It doesn't seem to worry us that many of the people we serve might be in danger. It doesn't seem to worry us that the people to whom we preach the Word of God, and I suppose these parables many times will be proclaimed in the Sunday liturgy, what do we say to people? Do we warn them? Do we alert them? Because we are sentinels to help people grow in the love of Jesus Christ. The radicality of the gospel is there. And we could argue maybe about the life of lay people. But for us, in order to fulfill our ministry, what possessions do I need? Exactly what possessions do I need to carry out my ministry? There are very powerful questions that I've read many times in the teachings and the lives of saints. For example, we as priests today, whoever we may be, the good thing is I don't know any of you, anything about any of your lives. Gives me a lot of freedom to not sound judgmental for any particular individual. Am I poorer today than when I began the priesthood? As my spiritual life has grown, I have realized how little I need to be happy, to serve the Lord, to serve the gospel. Or as I've journeyed, I've gathered and gathered and gathered. Another way of putting it, think of your families. And many of you don't come from wealthy backgrounds. Do you live better or worse than your families? Do your families help you, or do you help your families? Because the ones who have are the ones who give. And the ones who don't have are the ones who beg. For love of Christ, for love of the gospel, have I really given up my boat or my nets? Or it is when I came to the priesthood that I, who possessed no boat and no nets, found plenty of boats and plenty of nets. And we have a responsibility. Bishops have a responsibility as to how their priests live. Because we can give scandal, fathers, if we are caught with a woman or an inappropriate conversation. But all this business of poverty, it's an evangelical value that hasn't really penetrated into our spirituality. One of the great blessings of my life is that I had as a spiritual director, my spiritual director has already been declared venerable by the church. I mean, we have his holy pictures. He was my spiritual director for 20 years. He died in 1991, diocesan priest from the Diocese of Toledo. And when he used to comment the passage, which I've mentioned before, when Peter and John go up to the temple and they find the cripple there and he's begging, and they say, Peter says to him, "Look at us. We have no silver and no gold," but they perform the miracle. Stand up and walk. He used to say, you know why we cannot you know why we cannot perform that miracle? It's because we have plenty of silver and of gold. That's why we don't perform miracles. Because if I could say, what I have, these are his words, the Apostle Peter, what I have, I give you. So I invite you, and again, and I don't want to sound judgmental, you are my dearest friends, you are my brother priests. Who knows if we will ever in this life meet again? But for the love of God, don't let these things pass. That we have a responsibility to bear witness to the people of God that Christ is our only treasure. How will they believe that Christ is my treasure, for whom I sold everything? We who have left everything, father, mother, children, house, wife, plots of land, you name it. How are they going to believe that Christ is my treasure when I am swimming in abundance? Do we preach these things to the people of God? Do we feel embarrassed? Is it something that, let's not get into trouble, then people are going to come to the sacristy and say blah, 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 blah. Am I attracted to be with the poor of the diocese? How many priests in the year, and I think the bishop could only answer this question, and I beg him not to answer. How many priests have come to the bishop in the last year to say, Bishop, please send me to the worst parish? I mean, are people jockeying for the worst parishes of the diocese?
Yeah, I will agree with that.
To the poorest parishes, to the neediest parishes, to the most difficult parishes. It would be such a beautiful thing if the bishop could say, look, for this particular parish, I have plenty of candidates, because I don't know of any rich parish, or very few, I can't think of any, but maybe there are, rich parishes that don't have priests. And the poor are normally the ones who don't have motor cars to go to the neighboring parish. The rich normally have more than one vehicle to travel wherever they have to go. So if a parish is going to be left with a parish priest, make sure it's the rich parishes. They have plenty of means to go to wherever they want to go and find a mass. The poor don't. How precious are they to us? How much do I love them? How much am I able to recognize Christ who says, you did it to me? That whatever you did to the least of my brethren, you did it to me. And that we're ready to lay down our lives for the poorest people whom nobody loves, nobody cares about, nobody respects, they don't know anybody, nobody opens the doors to them, they don't stand a chance in life, and that they are humiliated and humiliated and humiliated. When we want to very politely speak of somebody's family, we normally say, he comes from a very humble background. Can you explain to me why in English, it's funny because in Spanish we say, Viene de una familia muy humilde. Why do we equate poverty with humility? It's very interesting. Should we not equate riches with the opposite of humility? Because that's what riches do. They make us very proud and they make us very powerful. It gives us a lot of autonomy. It gives us a lot of rest as to the future. We do not have to worry. But the gospel that does not speak of so many topics. I mean, what does the gospel say about bioethics? But the poverty, every other page, is about the poor. There is Lazarus, there is the widow's mite. When I entered the seminary, did I give away my things, my possessions? Or on the contrary, this was the highway to success, and how valued it is in this country, my brothers. It's practically a curse, as it was in the Old Testament, as it was for the original fathers of Protestantism. What was the sign of predestination? Material success. If we are predestined and God knows who's going to go to heaven or not, why labor and do good if I'm going to go to hell? How could I know if I'm predestined for the kingdom? Financial success. And that's on what much of this country is built on. We need to be very careful, because many of the values of this country are not so compatible with the gospel. And sometimes you need to choose. And I know that what I'm saying is hard to swallow. And if you love me, you love me. And if you hate me, you hate me. It was a pleasure. But I cannot forgive myself if I don't have the courage to repeat what the gospel says. If I don't adhere to the teaching of the gospel, please point it out. If I don't adhere to the teachings of the church, would you consider Pope John Paul a Marxist? No, would you? No, well, when you have some time, read his encyclical letter, Redemptoris Missio. You might even find it in Google in this instant. Look for number 60. And you will be very surprised at what he says in an encyclical letter, which is the magisterium of the church. I didn't write that encyclical. And he says, the church is the church of the poor. As I said during my first trip to Brazil, it wants to teach this doctrine, and it wants the church to look at the poor and to place them at the forefront of its mission. John Paul was not a Marxist, and he was not very keen on liberation theology. But he preached the gospel. And he was not very popular in this country. Some of you older priests will remember. When he published his encyclical letters, Solicitudo Rei Socialis, etc., you remember. Many in the church in this country, very pious people, were up in arms against him. We don't want to hear about it. Why is poverty, evangelical poverty, so important? Because it's the living proclamation that God is my Father. What is the sin of the prodigal son? He wanted to possess what he already possessed without the Father. In the Father's house, he had everything, but nothing belonged to him. He preferred to have less, but it's mine. What was the price that he paid for his greed? He lost his father's love. He left the Father's house. He will say to the older brother, my son, all I have is yours. And to this child who squandered all the wealth he had taken from his father's share of the inheritance, being the younger child, the terrible loss of wanting to possess as opposed to living as a child of my Father, having everything and possessing nothing. The tragedy was the separation from the love of the Father. What damage riches do to our spiritual lives. It helps us to live as sons and daughters of God. Christ, who lived in the most extreme poverty and died stripped of everything, even his clothes. And he is for whom I left everything. I am his priest. I am his friend. I am his companion. And I am going to be living on the lap of luxury. But I am the priest of someone who, for love of me, gave up everything. Wow. Furthermore, it's an enormous source of humility to live a simple life, to live spiritual poverty. There is no spiritual poverty if there is no affection for material poverty. It's very difficult to possess without being possessed. It's very difficult to live in great comfort and in great abundance. And I always say to people, no, but Father, I'm not attached to anything, really. You're not, really. Why don't you come and spend 1 month with me in the missions? Come 1 month with me in the missions. And then you will remember how attached you are to your motor car, to your hot water, to your insurance, to your Visa card, to... Come, 1 month. I'm not asking you to come 42 years of my missionary life. Just for 1 month. It's an education. Then tell me how much you miss your material possessions. How important it is to remember that Satan doesn't only come to my life in the disguise of a woman or a man to make me fall in chastity. Satan knows full well he has no attraction to me, that I have no attraction to the person of Satan. He would appear to me with a fork and horns. Believe me, the last thing I would do is run to him. So, he disguises himself as the Prince of Light. How much of my ministry depends on money? How important is money? Do you like money? Could you sever the bond between money and your ministry? Just make a test. Accept nothing for your reward. Give freely what freely was given to you. And then you will know if when there is no stipend or no gift or no donation, I might go, but I'm not so inclined. I've lived in very poor countries, and if there is no money, there are no sacraments, there is no blessing, there is nothing. We have some Mexican brothers, they know exactly what I'm speaking about. But I've been in the Dominican Republic, and it's more of the same. Africa, I've lived there, and you have to realize that the priest is the source of sustenance, not only for the family, I mean for the clan. So, brothers, this is a very, very thorny, speaking of the thorns that choke the word of God, very thorny subject. But I cannot forgive myself if I didn't speak to you about these things. Be very careful, because we're so clever with language that we know how to cover it up, and people know how to give without making us feel, Father, this is for your poor people. For my poor people? You think I'm going to give it to my poor people? Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Who is it for? The devil disguises himself many times in the disguise of seducing my heart with riches, which come with pomp and recognition. When my heart is set on even within the church, even in the structures of the church, and when people begin to praise and give to adulation, Father, I mean, you've been to Rome. I mean, you're in a career. I mean, I'm sure your name is up for the next bishop of blah, blah, blah. And no, me, no, my goodness. No, I love the simple life. I want to be a simple priest and be with the poor. No. No, that's for other people, whatever. Who said that? We need to realize that not everybody can live the same degree of poverty, but poverty is one of the greatest thermometers of a priest's growth in the spiritual life. If I don't have the capacity, I don't feel I have the strength to live any poor, at least to have the humility to say, Lord, I don't have the strength to live any poorer or to give up anything of what I possess. But at least ask for the grace. Grant me the grace to be poor. How seldom do we hear people confess sins against poverty? How few of us priests ever confess of misusing what is not mine? Because in the goodness of the people of God, they give to us in the absolute conviction that we do not possess it, but that we are administrators of a gift that does not belong to us. Have I always been a good administrator of what does not belong to me? Because if I have not, I am stealing. And there are parables that speak of that. Somebody came and they killed him, and the next one came and they killed him, and then the son came, and we will keep the vegetable garden on the plot of land. The wicked steward, remember. What kind of an administrator have I been? Because it's not to the chancery, it's not to the bishop that I'm going to render accountability. I'm sure they check your finances, at least the parochial ones. We owe an accountability to somebody, with all due respect, much greater than the bishop. The one who called us by name, and the one who said, I will be your only treasure. I will suffice. St. Paul says, with nothing we came into this world. If I have enough to eat and to clothe myself. But if my spiritual life can be measured by how I have ridden myself, liberated myself of those little pieces of thread that don't allow the little bird to fly, I am certainly not growing in the spiritual life. And this is something very serious, because regretfully, that which doesn't attract us is something that we seldom preach or propose to others. We are reluctant to speak of these things. Because if it's not a treasure in my life, it's not something I love. If it's not something that's so dear to me, how am I going to present it as good news to other people? Fathers, if you go back home thinking, beginning with of the least importance, that which is superfluous, and you start saying, they say in Latin, quantis non egeo, how much that I don't need. The Roman legions used to call their backpack, the shield, the spear, in Latin they called it the impedimenta. What impedimenta do I have to follow Christ? But lightweight, with the basics. I mean, the church takes care of us, that how many lay people would like to know, would like to be taken care of as we are taken care of by the diocese. I mean, what are we going to be missing? A roof, electricity, water, food. I mean, everything is provided to us. Nobody lives a more secure and comfortable life than we do. The church is very good to us. Unfortunately, the church cannot do the same for the rest of 1,000 million Catholics. But we need to think about these things, because it's not fair. It's not fair to say to undocumented people who don't have an insurance policy or a Visa or a MasterCard, to say, don't worry, confía en Dios. God is your Father. He'll take care of you. Really? Have you tried it, Father? How can we ask people to trust when we don't trust? When we don't give God the opportunity to be our Father, to provide for us? And I think this is very, very serious, because it is through wealth, material possessions, that corruption creeps in to the heart of the clergy more than any other way. And I think this is something that should concern the bishop very, very seriously. And especially because you have many, many immigrant priests, fathers who come from other countries, fathers who come from poor backgrounds. Do not forget where you came from. And be very honest with yourselves as to why am I here. This is a very, very serious subject for a diocese, fathers. One thing that maybe getting old, which I repeat a lot when I preach to the clergy, is I have come to the conclusion, fathers, that not all of us, and I was sharing it with Father Martin as we were driving here, not all of us became priests for the same reason. And this is very serious what I've just said. Why did I become a priest? Why did this man come to this country? Why did this man come to serve the people of God in this country? I think we have a lot to reflect. Because the problem is that we all think the things that I'm saying. I'm not some kind of super guru who has just come up with the most incredible statement. I'm sure you all think of these things. You might not say them on a microphone, but you think of them. And there's nothing wrong, because there are plenty of people of God to be served here, and God knows what would this diocese do with all those priests who came from other parts of the world. The problem is not the ministry. The problem is what there is in the heart. And that is what is so serious. Because it is impossible to grow in sanctity. And the greatest concern of a bishop is the sanctity of his priests, the holiness of his priests, as we are responsible for the sanctity of each other. I am my brother's keeper, and I will render an account of my parishioners as the bishop will render an account of his priests. In the end, in the final analysis, we are all responsible for our own final destination. We're not going to blame the bishop or the brother priest or the vicar general. But nobody can say that I wasn't warned. Let me give you an example that has nothing to do with poverty, but I may not have an opportunity to say it in other talks because of a very short period of time remaining. You might agree or disagree with me. This is just a personal statement of my own reflection on my ministry. I believe that the principal reason for which men and women, but primarily women, live in a state of mortal sin between the ages of 17 through 50 are contraceptives. I remember when I was a parish priest in the Dominican Republic, and I spoke many times about these things, and I said, you might agree or disagree. You might listen to what I'm saying or ignore what I'm saying. I know that in the neighboring parishes, nobody preaches what you have just heard this Sunday morning. But I can tell you one thing. When you die, don't say you didn't know. Don't say that your parish priest did not warn you. Don't say that he was a coward because he didn't want to have 2,500 people in the sacristy 5 seconds after the final hymn concludes. But I,
who said it to the poor people of my parish, I'm not going to have the courage to tell my brother priests. When was the last time I spoke about the evil, the intrinsic evil of contraception? Let them do what they want. Everybody uses them. And do whatever your conscience tells you. All of a sudden, we're all big on the conscience. I guess we don't want to get into trouble. I'm not going to bother myself with... And other topics of morality. You might be the only voice. I have a very dear friend who used to come to spiritual direction to me as a seminarian, and today he is a nuncio. He's an archbishop and a nuncio. As a seminarian, he came to spiritual direction to me. And don't start thinking, because I didn't even mention the nationality. When he was newly ordained, he was very big into the pro-life movement. And I think it was the Feast of Holy Innocents, ordained 6 months, full of fire and brimstone and courage, and I'm going to save the world all in one day. And it was a daily mass, and it was the Feast of Holy Innocents, and he wanted to speak against abortion. But he made the big mistake of peeking through the door of the sacristy, and he saw the congregation, which daily mass wasn't a full house. And he saw a woman who had come to him and confessed that she had had an abortion. He said, oh my God, I can't. So from the time he started putting on the alb and the cincture, shall I say, I speak, I don't speak, I speak, I don't speak, or whatever, he went out and he spoke about abortion. But thinking, I'm just destroying this poor woman, she's going to be thinking that I'm saying it because of her or whatever. When he comes back to the sacristy, this other lady comes to him in tears, saying, Father, I need to go to confession to you. Obviously, it had touched her and brought her to conversion. Why do we assume that our word is so powerless that it's not going to convert anybody? Why are we so doubtful that the power of the Holy Spirit has the fire to move people to conversion? And this was only an example of a topic which is not even the issue at hand. But would I do the same about poverty? But I need to have credentials. I need to be able to speak from experience. And I need to be a witness to what I proclaim. Let us not speak of what we have no intention of putting into practice. But normally, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And if something is precious to me, if something is dear to me, I will find a way to proclaim the beauty of that truth. Do I believe that leading a more simple life, that giving away my possessions again, I'm going to be a much happier person? Or on the contrary, let me not mess around with my life, I'm doing perfectly okay the way I am, and I know many priests who live much better, because we all know somebody who lives much better than us, which is the perfect excuse to do nothing. But you think I'm rich? You should go and see Father so-and-so. I remember once, I do a lot of begging because where I am, there is nothing. I mean, nothing to eat. I can't put fuel in the car. I remember once going to a very, very rich lady in Madrid to ask for a donation. And she gave me a rather cheap donation, not very generous. A lady I knew quite well. And she said, oh, this is the best I can do at this time. I mean, she could have added 2 zeros to the check and it wouldn't even register in her account. And she said to me, you know, what you should do is go to Mrs. So-and-so. Now, she is really rich. Well, I think she's the only woman who is a little richer than her in Spain. We always know someone. But how beautiful it is when you read the lives of the saints the St. John Vianney, the great saints, our patron saints, do their lives have anything to do with ours? Does that, their witness, their teaching, their testimony, have anything to do with mine? And we honor them, and we preach on their feast days. We say all these wonderful things about the things they did and the way they lived, but with absolutely no intention of imitating their witness, their teaching, and their testimony. How important it is that we allow the gospel to come alive, the life of Jesus Christ, who being rich gave up everything to hang on a cross so that I would follow him. Why is it difficult to follow Jesus? Not because it's difficult, but because to follow Jesus carrying the boat and wrapped in your nets must be pretty uncomfortable. Well, did you try giving up the boat and the nets? Might be easier. It's the only reason why the rich young man couldn't follow Jesus Christ. And one of the things, and forgive me for being so blunt, but the more we get to know each other, the more I'm warming up. Thank God this finishes on Thursday. But think of it, because I think these things are very serious. I mean, we think we're very orthodox. What is orthodoxy? He's a very orthodox priest and lives on the lap of luxury. That's orthodox. I thought orthodox was to obey the teachings of Jesus. He might not speak of other things, but of poverty, of attachment to riches. And it seems as though the doctrine of Jesus Christ we have to follow to the letter, the Council of Trent, the magisterium, Pope this, Pope that, the documents of the councils of who knows what. We've all heard of the word seminary. I'm not sure you know where the idea of seminaries come from. Of course, it's in the teachings. Officially, it's instituted by the Council of Trent. But the idea doesn't come from a council. It comes from individuals. It was from a Spanish saint, St. John of Avila, saint patron of the Spanish clergy. His feast day is on May 10th, doctor of the church, who writes he was too old to attend the Council of Trent, although he had been invited, but he was too sick and too elderly. And he writes what are called two memorials to the Council of Trent, which he sends to the council through his bishop, the Bishop of Córdoba, Pedro Guerrero. Those memorials abroad, what he says about the poverty of the house of a bishop, of the life of priests. He was a diocesan priest. Yeah, and, we haven't taken the vow. No, what we have to do is live the gospel. What he did on the day of his ordination, he invited 12 poor people to a meal, and he washed their feet. St. John of Avila. Most of his disciples, the disciples of John of Avila, became Jesuits. He and Ignatius were very good friends. The teachings, he's so important in the Catholic Church, although sadly so unknown outside of Spain, that the first approval to the mystical writings of Teresa of Jesus come from, they used to call him Maestro Avila. His Opus Omnia is his commentary called the Audi Filia, Listen Daughter, remember that psalm, which is a magnificent piece of mystical theology. But one of the things that he says, you want to grow in sanctity, how can you contemplate him in the poverty of a manger and still want to be rich? So I think, fathers, we have a lot to think. Nobody has been canonized for being a millionaire, and fathers, nobody has been canonized for being orthodox. We are canonized for following Jesus with radicality in all his teaching. It's the imitation of Christ. And I'm not inviting anybody to be disobedient to the teachings of the church, quite the contrary. Because the magisterium of the church on this topic is very, very abundant. We might be blinded to it. But the church has plenty of teachings. You read Pastoris Tabobois, what it speaks about the poverty of the priest as an evangelical value. The witness of the saints, all the encyclicals on the priesthood, all speak of the importance of living such a simple life. There is a beautiful encyclical, and now the name escapes me, of Pope John XXIII on the priesthood. It was on the occasion of the centenary of St. John Vianney. The name now escapes me, maybe some of you remember. And he quotes that time where John Vianney went to this priestly meeting, and the priests around him were all complaining of his same episcopal region, or whatever it was called at that time. And they were complaining that people were not coming to church, that they were not coming to the sacrament, or whatever. And he says, you may have preached, you may have celebrated the sacraments, but are you living poverty? Until you live poverty, don't complain. Because poverty, evangelical poverty, brothers, has a lot to do with the cross of Jesus Christ. Poverty is a crucifixion. The poor live a crucified existence. And St. Paul says, but some of you live as enemies of the cross of Christ. What is the purpose of going on Good Friday with such reverence to kiss a piece of bronze, of wood, of timber, of ivory on a crucifix? For what? When I have absolutely no intention of making that cross and that kiss a part of my life. Because poverty is a crucifixion. It's a very powerful means by participating in the cross of Jesus Christ. I invite you to ponder these things. Think of your own lives. Think how out of love of Jesus, which is the only motivation we can have in our priesthood, how can we imitate the poverty of Jesus Christ, of the Blessed Mother, of the saints, in accordance to the teachings of the Church? We give you thanks.